Jake Morrison stood in the center of the huge crystal chamber. His boots made small clicking sounds on the smooth floor as he shifted his weight. Around him, alien beings sat in a half-circle on raised platforms. Some glowed with soft blue light. Others swayed back and forth like tall plants in a gentle breeze. The room was quiet except for the strange, humming sounds that some of the aliens made when they talked to each other. Jake had been standing here for 2 hours now. His back was starting to hurt, but he kept his face calm. He had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of aliens was never a good idea. "Captain Morrison," said a voice that sounded like wind blowing through leaves. The speaker was a Zephyrian, one of the plant-like beings that seemed to run most of the galactic government. "You have been called here to answer for the actions of your species." Jake nodded once. "I understand. What exactly are we being accused of?" Another alien spoke up. This one was tall and thin, with skin that looked like tree bark. "Your people have been feeding meat to the Ravak. This is against all galactic law. The Ravak are dangerous predators. They must be contained, not helped." The Ravak children were starving, Jake said. His voice was steady, but inside he felt anger building. "Our soldiers shared their food with hungry kids. That's what humans do." The plant-like alien rustled its leaves in what Jake had learned was a sign of disapproval. "This is exactly the problem. Your species does not understand the danger of carnivores. They are killers. They destroy life. They cannot be allowed to spread their corruption." Jake wanted to laugh, but he kept his face serious. If only these aliens knew what they were really dealing with. Humans weren't just sympathetic to carnivores, they were carnivores themselves. Well, mostly. They ate plants too, but their teeth and eyes and instincts all came from millions of years of hunting and killing. 3 months ago, when the human fleet had first made contact with the Galactic Coalition, nobody had asked about their diet. The aliens had just assumed that any species smart enough to build spaceships must have evolved beyond such primitive needs. They had been wrong. The trouble started when the Coalition encountered the Ravak. These Volf-like beings lived on a dying world in the outer rim of the galaxy. Their planet was getting colder every year. The animals they hunted for food were dying out. Without help, the entire Ravak species would be extinct within a generation, but the Coalition didn't see them as people in trouble. They saw them as monsters. The herbivore species that controlled galactic politics had decided long ago that eating meat was evil. Any creature that killed other living things for food was considered corrupt and dangerous. Amy Foster, a young scientist on Jake's ship, had tried to explain to the Coalition leaders that the Ravak weren't evil. They were just trying to survive. She had shown them videos of Ravak families caring for their young, teaching their children, and mourning their dead. But the aliens didn't want to listen. "Predators are an evolutionary mistake," one of the Coalition leaders had said. "Civilized beings find other ways to get energy. We eat plants. We filter nutrients from water. We absorb light from our suns. Only savage species need to kill to live." The Coalition's solution was simple and brutal. The Ravak would be moved to special planets where they could live under careful watch. They would be given artificial food that didn't come from killing animals. If they refused to change their ways, they would be removed from the galaxy entirely. Jake had watched the news reports of Ravak families being forced from their homes. He had seen the children crying as they were separated from their parents. The Coalition called it humane relocation. Jake called it something else. That's when Lieutenant Pete Collins had made his mistake. Collins was a good soldier, but he had a soft heart. When he saw Ravak cubs digging through garbage looking for food, he couldn't help himself. He gave them military rations that contained real meat. The cubs had eaten the food gratefully. For the first time in weeks, they had full bellies. But someone had recorded the whole thing. Within hours, the video was playing on news channels across the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and angry. How dare the humans feed meat to the Ravak? Didn't they understand that this would only make the carnivores stronger and more dangerous? The Coalition demanded an explanation. That's when Dr. Lisa Hamilton had to give the Coalition a lesson in human biology. She stood in front of the same alien leaders who were now questioning Jake. With charts and pictures, she explained how humans had evolved. "We are omnivores," she had said. "We eat both plants and meat. Our ancestors were hunters. We have sharp teeth for cutting meat. Our eyes face forward to help us track prey. Our brains are wired to understand hunting and competition." The silence in the chamber had been deafening. The aliens stared at her as if she had just told them that humans were demons from another dimension. "You mean," one of them had whispered, "that humans are predators too?" "Yes," Lisa had said simply. "We are." Now Jake stood in the same chamber, facing the consequences of that revelation. The Coalition had spent weeks studying human biology, human history, and human culture. They had learned about Earth's violent past, about wars and hunting and the food chain. They had discovered that humans weren't just sympathetic to carnivores, they were carnivores themselves. "Captain Morrison," the Zephyrian said, "we have made a decision about your species. Humanity will be given a choice. You can undergo dietary rehabilitation and learn to live without meat, or you can leave Coalition space permanently." Jake felt a muscle in his jaw twitch. "And if we refuse both options?" "Then you will be treated as we treat all dangerous predators. You will be contained." The threat was clear. Join the galaxy's vegetarian society or be locked away like the Ravak. Jake thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who had no idea that their place in the galaxy was being decided by a bunch of plant people who thought eating a hamburger was evil. "I need to discuss this with my government," Jake said. "You have one standard galactic week," the alien replied. "After that, we will assume you have chosen to remain predators, and predators have no place in civilized society." Jake nodded and turned to leave. As he walked toward the exit, he could hear the aliens talking among themselves in their strange, musical languages. They sounded relieved, as if they had just solved a difficult problem, but Jake knew better. They hadn't solved anything. They had just created a much bigger problem. Because humans weren't just carnivores, they were carnivores who had learned to think, to plan, and to fight back. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you tried to cage a predator that was smarter than you were. And Jake had a feeling that the lesson was going to be a hard one for everyone involved. Ryan Cole was checking mineral scans when the emergency message came through. The communication system on his ship Terra Nova made a sharp beeping sound that meant urgent priority. Ryan looked up from his work screen and pressed the accept button. The face that appeared belonged to Admiral Kate Wilson back at Luna Station. She looked tired and worried. "Commander Cole, I need you to return to base immediately. Cancel your current mission and head home as fast as you can." "What's the situation, Admiral?" Ryan asked. He had been in space for 3 months, studying asteroids in the Kepler system. It was boring work, but somebody had to do it. "Humanity's membership in the Galactic Coalition is under review," Wilson said. "All human ships are being recalled. All joint projects with alien species are being suspended. We need every senior officer back at Luna Station for emergency meetings." Ryan felt his stomach drop. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that some Coalition species are demanding we change our entire way of life before they'll let us stay in Galactic Society," Wilson replied. "I'll brief you when you get here. Just get back as fast as you can." The communication ended, leaving Ryan staring at a blank screen. He had heard rumors about problems with the Coalition, but he hadn't expected things to get this serious. He turned to his navigation officer. "Set course for Luna Station. Maximum speed." The journey back to human space took 4 days. During that time, Ryan read every report he could find about the situation. The news was not good. Coalition species were canceling trade agreements with humans. Scientific exchange programs were being shut down. Some alien governments were even talking about putting restrictions on human travel in Coalition space. All because humans ate meat. Ryan had trouble believing it at first. The galaxy was ready to kick out humanity because they didn't like human food choices. It seemed ridiculous. But as he read more reports, he began to understand how serious the aliens were about this issue. Dr. Sandra Mitchell, The chief medical officer on Ryan's ship had been doing her own research. She knocked on Ryan's door on the second day of their journey home. "Commander, I need to show you something," she said. Her face was pale and she looked shaken. "I've been comparing human biology to the galactic standard. What I found is going to make our problems a lot worse." Sandra led Ryan to the medical bay. She had charts and data displays covering every wall. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a comparison chart. "This shows the gravity levels on different species' homeworlds." Ryan looked at the numbers. Most alien species came from worlds with gravity between 0.3 and 0.7 times Earth normal. Earth's gravity was marked in red at the top of the chart. "We're stronger than almost every species in the galaxy," Sandra continued. "Our bones are denser, our muscles are more powerful. What feels normal to us would crush most aliens." She moved to another chart. This shows atmospheric pressure. Again, Earth is at the extreme end. Most aliens need artificial life support just to breathe on our world. Ryan began to understand where this was going. "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying that Earth isn't just a world that produced carnivores," Sandra replied. "Earth is what xenobiologists are starting to call a death world. The conditions that created humanity would kill most other species." She pulled up more data. Temperature ranges that humans could survive, radiation levels that wouldn't harm them, toxic substances that human bodies could process. In every category, humans were far more resistant to damage than the galactic norm. "Look at this," Sandra said, showing him a medical scan. "This is a human immune system compared to a Zephyrian immune system. We're basically walking biological weapons compared to these people. Our bodies are designed to fight off diseases and toxins. That would kill them in minutes." Ryan sat down heavily in a chair. "So not only are we predators, we're also nearly indestructible by galactic standards." "It gets worse," Sandra said. "I've been studying human psychology reports. Our tolerance for violence, our ability to make quick decisions under pressure, our instinctive understanding of competition and conflict, all of this comes from evolving on a world where everything was trying to kill us." She showed him video files from Earth, hurricanes that could level cities, earthquakes that could split continents, volcanic eruptions that could change the climate, animals that were faster, stronger, and more dangerous than anything most aliens had ever imagined. "Even our plants are more dangerous than most alien animals," Sandra continued. "We have flowers that can poison you, trees that can cause severe allergic reactions, vines that can grow fast enough to strangle other plants." Ryan watched footage of a human child playing in a garden that would be considered a toxic wasteland by most galactic species. The child was laughing and running around plants that could cause serious harm to alien visitors. "The aliens think we're corrupted by our carnivorous nature," Sandra said. "But the truth is we're just products of a world that was trying to kill us every day for millions of years. We didn't choose to be tough. We had to be tough to survive." When Ryan finally reached Luna Station, he found the place in chaos. Ships were arriving from across human space. Military officers, scientists, and diplomats were rushing between meetings. Everyone looked worried and tired. Ambassador Helen Parker was in the main conference room, arguing with a group of alien delegates on a video screen. Ryan could hear raised voices even through the closed door. "The humans cannot remain in coalition space in their current form," one of the aliens was saying. "They are too dangerous. Their capacity for violence, their resistance to normal methods of control, their instinctive aggression, all of this makes them a threat to civilized society." "We haven't threatened anyone," Parker replied. Her voice was calm, but Ryan could see the anger in her eyes. "We've followed every coalition law. We've contributed to joint research projects. We've helped with disaster relief on 3 different worlds." "That was before we knew what you really were," the alien continued. "Deathworlders are unpredictable. Your species has survived conditions that would destroy us." "That means you think differently than we do? You accept death and violence as normal parts of life?" This makes you fundamentally incompatible with civilized society. Ryan slipped into the room and took a seat at the back. Parker saw him enter and gave him a small nod. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Parker asked the aliens. "Complete biological and psychological rehabilitation," the alien replied. "Your species must be modified to remove your aggressive instincts. Your physical capabilities must be reduced to safe levels. Your dietary needs must be changed to eliminate your dependence on meat. Only then can you be trusted to live among civilized beings." The room fell silent. Ryan felt his hands clench into fists. They wanted to change what humans were at the most basic level. They wanted to make them into something else entirely. "And if we refuse?" Parker asked quietly. "Then you will be classified as a dangerous species and treated accordingly," the alien said. "You will be confined to your own star system and prevented from spreading your corruption to the rest of the galaxy." Parker stood up slowly. "I see. Thank you for making your position clear." She ended the communication and turned to face the room full of human officers. "Well, gentlemen and ladies, it seems we have a choice. We can let them turn us into something we're not, or we can prepare for war." Ryan looked around the room at his fellow humans. These were people who had spent their lives exploring the galaxy, building relationships with alien species, and working for peace. But they were also people who had grown up on a world that had tried to kill them every day. The aliens had made a serious mistake. They had assumed that humans would be afraid of conflict. But humans weren't afraid of conflict. They had been dealing with it their entire evolutionary history. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you threatened a species that had survived on a death world for millions of years. And Ryan had a feeling that the lesson was going to be more painful than anyone expected. The Ravak ship appeared on Luna Station's sensors without warning. One moment the space around the station was empty. The next moment a dark vessel was hanging motionless near the docking bay. The ship's design was unlike anything in the Coalition fleet, all sharp angles and black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Steve Baker, the head of station security, watched the mystery ship through the observation window. He had been expecting trouble ever since the Coalition started making demands about human dietary habits. But he hadn't expected help to arrive in the form of the galaxy's most feared predators. "Sir, we're receiving a communication request," his communications officer reported. "It's coming from the unknown vessel." "Put it through," Steve said. The face that appeared on the screen was intimidating even by human standards. The being looked like a cross between a wolf and a bear, with dark fur, yellow eyes, and teeth that were clearly designed for tearing flesh. When it spoke, its voice was deep and rough. "I am Elder Thrakvior of the Ravak. I request permission to speak with your leaders. We have a proposal that may interest you." Steve looked at the creature on the screen. 3 months ago, the Coalition had been calling these beings monsters that needed to be contained. Now, one of them was asking for a meeting. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind that involves mutual survival," Thrakvior replied. "My people have been watching the Coalition's treatment of humanity. We believe we can help each other." 20 minutes later, Steve found himself in the station's main conference room with Elder Thrakvior and 2 other Ravak. The aliens were even more impressive in person. They stood over 2 meters tall, their bodies covered in thick fur that looked like it could stop a knife blade. Their claws were retracted but visible, and their eyes missed nothing. But what surprised Steve most was how they acted. Despite their fearsome appearance, they showed respect to the humans they met. They waited to be invited to sit. They kept their claws retracted. They spoke in quiet, measured tones. "Your people saved our children," Thrakvior said once everyone was seated. When the Coalition was ready to let them starve, human soldiers shared their food. "This is not something we will forget." Ambassador Parker had arrived for the meeting along with several other senior officers. She leaned forward in her chair. "What exactly are you proposing, Elder?" "An alliance," Thrakvior replied simply. "The Coalition has decided that both our species are too dangerous to exist in their civilized galaxy. They want to change us or contain us. We believe it would be better to work together. Lieutenant Colonel Tom Harris, the station's military commander, looked skeptical. What could your people offer us? No offense, but you're facing the same problems we are. One of the other Ravak, a female with silver-streaked fur, spoke up. We are hunters. We understand stealth, tracking, and combat in ways that the herbivore species never could. We know how to move unseen through space. We know how to strike without warning. We know how to survive when everything is trying to kill you. Dr. Karen Lewis, a human scientist who studied alien cultures, had been listening carefully. She pulled out a data pad and showed some research to the group. I've been studying Ravak social structures. They have concepts of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice that are very similar to human military values. They understand chain of command, tactical thinking, and the necessity of accepting casualties to achieve objectives. Steve looked at the data. It was true. The Ravak weren't just random predators. They were organized, disciplined, and intelligent. In many ways, they were more like humans than the civilized herbivore species that controlled the galaxy. There's something else, Dr. Lewis continued. The Ravak have been dealing with the Coalition's prejudice for much longer than we have. They've developed technologies and strategies that we could use. Thrakvior nodded. Our ships can move through space without being detected by Coalition sensors. Our weapons can penetrate Coalition shields. Our people can survive in environments that would kill herbivore species. And in return? Parker asked. Medical technology? The silver-furred Ravak replied. Manufacturing capabilities, scientific knowledge. Your people have achieved things in 6 months that we have been trying to accomplish for decades. But there was something else, something that Steve could see in the way the Ravak looked at. The humans, it was respect, but more than that. It was recognition. You understand us? Thrakvior said quietly. When your soldiers fed our children, they didn't do it because they were ordered to. They did it because they saw hungry young ones and their instincts told them to help. Your people think like hunters. You understand the pack mentality. You know that sometimes you have to fight to protect what matters. General Patricia Stone, the highest-ranking military officer on the station, had been quiet during most of the meeting. Now she spoke up. What you're really saying is that we're more compatible with each other than either of us is with the Coalition species. Yes, Thrakvior said. The herbivore species see conflict as abnormal. They believe that all problems can be solved through negotiation and compromise. But we know better. We know that sometimes the only way to protect your family is to show your teeth. Steve thought about the Coalition's ultimatum. Change what humans were at the most basic level, or be locked away from the galaxy. The herbivore species couldn't understand that humans weren't broken things that needed to be fixed. They were products of a harsh world that had taught them to survive. There's a strategic advantage here that goes beyond mutual defense, General Stone said. The Coalition has maintained peace by excluding or eliminating carnivorous species. But what happens when they face a threat that herbivore psychology can't handle? What happens when they need someone who understands the predator mindset? The Ravak exchanged glances. The silver-furred female spoke again. You believe such a threat exists? I believe it's inevitable, Stone replied. The galaxy is a big place. Somewhere out there are things that don't think like herbivores, things that can't be reasoned with or negotiated with. When the Coalition encounters something like that, they're going to need allies who understand how predators think. Doctor, Lewis pulled up star charts on the conference room screen. There are entire sectors of the galaxy that remain unexplored. The Coalition avoids them because they're considered too dangerous. But dangerous to herbivores doesn't necessarily mean dangerous to species that evolved on Deathworlds. Steve began to see the bigger picture. The Coalition had created a civilization based on the assumption that all intelligent life would eventually evolve beyond violence and competition. But what if that assumption was wrong? What if there were threats out there that required exactly the kind of thinking that herbivore species had tried to eliminate? You're talking about more than just survival, Steve said. You're talking about becoming the galaxy's guardians. Thrak VOR showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. Someone has to watch the dark places. Someone has to be ready for the things that herbivores can't imagine. If the Coalition wants to exclude us from their peaceful society, perhaps we should accept that role. The meeting continued for several more hours. By the end, the framework of an alliance had been established. The Ravak would share their stealth, technology, and combat expertise. Humans would provide medical support, manufacturing capabilities, and scientific knowledge. Together, they would create a force that could operate in the dangerous regions of space that the Coalition avoided. But as Steve walked back to his quarters that night, he realized that they had agreed to something much bigger than a simple military alliance. They had agreed to become the galaxy's predators, not the mindless killers that the Coalition imagined, but intelligent hunters who would protect civilization from the threats it was too peaceful to face. The herbivore species had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about the dangers of carnivorous nature. Instead, they had created exactly the kind of alliance they feared most. And somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, Steve had a feeling that their new role was going to be tested, sooner than anyone expected. The first attack came from the edge of known space in a region that had been empty for thousands of years. Admiral Kevin Walsh was reviewing supply reports when the emergency alert came through his ship's communication system. The sound was urgent and sharp, demanding immediate attention. Admiral, we're receiving a distress signal from the Zephyrian science vessel Harmony's Light, his communications officer reported. They were conducting surveys in the Outer Rim sector when they went silent 3 hours ago. Kevin looked at the star charts on his command screen. The Outer Rim was far from any inhabited systems. It was the kind of place that Coalition ships rarely visited because there was nothing there worth studying. What was their last known position? Grid reference 847 Alpha Prime, the officer replied. They were investigating some unusual energy readings in that sector. Kevin felt a cold feeling in his stomach. The human-Ravak alliance had been sharing intelligence for 2 months now. One of the things they had discovered was that the empty regions of space weren't as empty as the Coalition believed. There were things out there that moved in the darkness between stars. Prepare the fleet for immediate departure, Kevin ordered. Signal the Ravak vessels to join us. And get me a direct line to Luna Station. The human fleet that responded to. The distress call was different from the ships that had first joined the Coalition 6 months earlier. Working with Ravak engineers, they had upgraded their weapons and shields. Their hulls were darker, designed to absorb sensor sweeps rather than reflect them. They moved through space like predators stalking prey. The Ravak ships that joined them were even more impressive. They seemed to bend light around themselves, making them almost invisible against the star field. Their weapons were unlike anything in the Coalition arsenal, designed not just to destroy enemy ships, but to hunt them down no matter where they tried to hide. It took 18 hours to reach the Harmony's Light's last known position. What they found there made even the experienced human and Ravak crews fall silent. The Zephyrian ship hung in space like a dead thing. Its hull was intact, but something was wrong. The ship's lights were still on, but they flickered strangely, as if the power was being drained by something inside. There was no response to communication attempts. Life signs? Kevin asked his sensor operator. Negative, sir. No biological activity detected anywhere on the ship. Kevin turned to Captain Tony Martinez, who commanded the destroyer Vigilant. Take a boarding party and investigate. Full combat gear. Whatever happened to that crew, I don't want it happening to us. Tony nodded and selected a team of his best soldiers. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons that could punch through Coalition shields. As they approached the alien ship in their shuttle, they could see that something was very wrong. The hull of the Harmony's Light was covered in a strange crystalline growth. It looked like frozen lightning spreading across the ship's surface in branching patterns. The crystals pulsed with a faint blue light that seemed to follow the boarding party's movements. Admiral, you need to see this, Tony reported over the radio. The ship's hull is covered in some kind of organic crystal formation. It's definitely not natural. Inside the ship, the boarding party found something even more disturbing. The corridors were filled with the same crystalline growth, but here, it was thicker, more complex. It formed intricate patterns on the walls and ceiling, and it was clearly alive. "The crew is gone," Tony reported. "Not dead, gone. Their uniforms are here, but there are no bodies, no signs of struggle. It's like they just vanished." Dr. Nancy Bell, the fleet's xenobiologist, was monitoring the boarding party from her ship. She had been studying the sensor readings and didn't like what she was seeing. "Commander Martinez, I need you to get samples of that crystal formation, but be careful. The energy readings suggest it's some kind of colonial intelligence." Tony and his team collected samples using remote tools. They were careful not to touch the crystals directly, but even being near them felt wrong. The crystals seemed to watch them, to react to their presence. As they were leaving the ship, one of Tony's soldiers made a mistake. He brushed against a crystal formation with his gloved hand. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The soldier stopped moving. His eyes went blank. Then he turned toward his teammates with a strange, jerky motion. When he spoke, his voice was different, layered, as if multiple people were speaking at once. "We hunger," the soldier said. "We consume. We grow, you will join us." Tony didn't hesitate. He fired his weapon at the infected soldier, reducing him to atoms. The crystal formations throughout the ship pulsed brighter, as if feeding on the violence. "Get us out of here," Tony ordered. Now, back on the fleet, Dr. Bell studied the crystal samples in a sealed laboratory. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The crystals were not just alive, they were a hive mind that consumed consciousness itself. They didn't kill their victims. They absorbed them, adding their knowledge and memories to the collective. "These are devourers," she reported to Admiral Walsh. "I've found references to them in ancient Coalition archives. They're colonial intelligences that feed on sentient thought. The galaxy fought them millions of years ago and barely survived." Kevin felt the cold feeling in his stomach get worse. "Why are they back now?" "They were never gone," Dr. Bell replied. "They were just waiting in the dark spaces between galaxies. Something has awakened them, and they're hungry." The Coalition's response to the Devourer threat was predictable and disastrous. When Kevin reported the incident to Coalition Command, they immediately sent a diplomatic mission to establish contact with the new species. They believed that any intelligent life could be reasoned with, negotiated with, convinced to live in peace. The diplomatic ship disappeared within hours of reaching the outer rim. Then another science vessel vanished. Then a small trading fleet. Each time, the Devourers grew stronger, their hive mind expanding as they consumed more conscious beings. Admiral Walsh found himself in the impossible position of watching the Coalition make the same mistakes over and over. They kept sending ships to negotiate with creatures that saw negotiation as an invitation to feed. They kept trying to establish communication with beings that only understood hunger. "They don't want to talk," Kevin told the Coalition Command during an emergency meeting. "They want to eat. Every ship you send them makes them stronger, but the herbivore species couldn't understand this. Violence was so foreign to their nature that they couldn't imagine a species that existed only to consume and destroy. They kept insisting that there had to be a peaceful solution. The first major battle came when a Devourer vessel entered Coalition space and attacked a mining colony. The creature had grown large enough to consume an entire ship, its crystalline structure, spreading across multiple hulls welded together into a nightmare hybrid. Coalition defense ships responded with standard tactics: shields up, weapons on, stun, attempts to disable rather than destroy. The Devourer consumed them all, growing larger and more complex with each victory. That's when Tony Martinez and his destroyer Vigilant arrived. Tony had been studying Devourer tactics for weeks. He knew that these creatures only understood one language: overwhelming force applied without mercy. "All weapons, full power," Tony ordered. "No warning shots. No attempts to disable. We kill it before it kills us." The battle lasted 6 minutes. The Vigilance weapons, upgraded with Ravak technology, tore through the Devourer's crystalline structure like it was made of glass. The creature's death scream was heard across subspace, a sound of pure rage and hunger that made Coalition crews shudder, but the victory came at a cost. The galaxy had seen the civilized herbivore species fail where the primitive carnivores had succeeded. The Coalition's peaceful philosophy had been proven inadequate against a threat that couldn't be reasoned with or negotiated with. For the first time in galactic history, the herbivore species found themselves looking to predators for protection. The very creatures they had tried to eliminate or change were now the only ones who could save them from an enemy that fed on consciousness itself. The war with the Devourers had begun, and it would test everything the galaxy thought it knew about civilization, peace, and the price of survival. The war lasted 3 years and changed everything. Angela Ross stood in what used to be the main plaza of New Geneva, watching human soldiers teach Coalition aliens how to fight. The beautiful crystal gardens where diplomats once held peaceful meetings had been replaced with obstacle courses and weapons training areas. 3 years ago, Angela had been a simple colonel in the human military. Now she was a general commanding mixed forces of humans, Ravak, and reluctant Coalition species who had finally accepted that some problems couldn't be solved with words. The transformation had been painful for everyone involved. The Coalition species had struggled to learn combat tactics. Their minds were built for cooperation and peaceful problem-solving. Teaching them to think like predators, to strike first and ask questions later, had been like trying to teach fish to climb trees. But they had learned because the alternative was being consumed by the Devourers. The Zephians had been the first to adapt. Their plant-like bodies could be modified to carry weapons and armor. Their natural ability to communicate through chemical signals made them excellent scouts and coordinators. They learned to use their peaceful nature as a weapon, approaching Devourer vessels as if they wanted to negotiate, then striking when the enemy was distracted. The Valkyrie had been harder to train. Their tree-like forms were slow and inflexible, but they had incredible endurance and could survive in environments that would kill other species. Human and Ravak engineers had developed special combat suits that let them move faster while protecting their vulnerable root systems. Even the small, timid Aquarii had found their place in the war. Their ability to process information at incredible speeds made them perfect for analyzing Devourer attack patterns and predicting their movements. They worked in teams with human strategists to plan battles that the enemy couldn't anticipate. But the real heroes of the war had been the joint human-Ravak assault teams. These mixed units had learned to fight together as if they were members of the same species. Humans provided the technology and tactical planning. Ravak provided the stealth and close combat expertise. Together they had developed new ways of fighting that neither species could have achieved alone. Angela remembered the turning point of the war. It had come during the Battle of the Void Gate, when the largest Devourer hive ship had tried to open a permanent gateway to the dark space between galaxies. The creature was massive, larger than some moons, its crystalline structure pulsing with the absorbed consciousness of millions of victims. General Chris Turner had commanded the Coalition fleet during that battle. He was a human who had spent his career trying to build bridges between species. But when faced with an enemy that wanted to consume everything he had worked to protect, he had become something else entirely. All units, this is General Turner, his voice had crackled over the communication system. We are not here to negotiate. We are not here to capture prisoners. We are here to kill these things before they kill us. Show no mercy, because they will show none to you. The battle had been fought in the corridors of the hive ship itself. Human and Ravak soldiers had fought side by side through passages made of living crystal that tried to absorb their minds. They had used weapons that could destroy matter at the molecular level, turning the Devourer's own structure against them. Angela had been part of the final assault team that reached the hive ship's core. The center of the creature was a massive chamber filled with crystalline formations that pulsed with stolen memories and consciousness. She could hear the voices of the consumed victims echoing through the crystal structures begging for release. Burn it all, she had ordered her team. Every crystal, every fragment. Don't let any of it survive. The weapons they used were terrible things, designed by human and Ravak engineers specifically for fighting devourers. They didn't just destroy matter, they disrupted the quantum connections that held the hive mind together. The creature's death. Scream had been heard across multiple dimensions, a sound of pure agony that had driven some coalition soldiers temporarily insane, but they had won. The hive ship had been destroyed, its gateway closed, and the devourer invasion had been stopped. The victory had come at a terrible cost, but it had been victory nonetheless. Now, 3 years later, Angela stood in the ruins of what had once been a peaceful colony world and watched the aftermath of their success. The galaxy was safe from the devourers, but it was no longer the same galaxy that had existed before the war. Ashley Morgan, who had once been a simple xenobiologist, was now humanity's chief diplomatic officer. She had been negotiating with coalition leaders for months, trying to establish new relationships in the post-war galaxy. The conversations were very different from the ones that had taken place before the invasion. The coalition species are grateful, Ashley reported during their weekly meeting. But they're also terrified. They've seen what we're capable of when we're forced to fight. They know that without human and Ravak protection, they would have been completely destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The galaxy that had once wanted to eliminate or change humanity now depended on them for survival. The herbivore species that had dominated galactic politics for millennia now looked to predators for leadership and protection. What do they want from us? Angela asked. Everything, Ashley replied. They want us to patrol the dangerous regions of space. They want us to investigate threats that they're too peaceful to handle. They want us to be their guardians, their protectors, their military force. Angela looked out at the training grounds where coalition soldiers were learning to use human weapons. And in return, they're offering us complete authority over galactic defense, Ashley said. No more questions about our dietary habits. No more demands for biological modification. No more threats of containment. They're willing to accept us as we are, as long as we keep them safe. It was everything humanity had wanted when they first joined the galactic community. Acceptance, respect, and a place in the larger universe. But it had come at a price that nobody had expected to pay. Captain Jake Morrison, who had started this whole crisis by standing trial for feeding meat to Ravak children, was now an elder, statesman in the new galactic order. He had been asked to address the reformed Galactic Council, and his words had become famous across human space. We didn't choose to be predators, he had said, standing in the same chamber where he had once been judged. Evolution chose it for us, but we chose what to do with that nature. We chose to protect instead of consume. We chose to defend instead of devour. He had paused, looking at the alien faces around him. The carnivore was indeed the lesson, but not the one you intended to teach. You wanted to show us that predators were evil. Instead, you learned that sometimes the galaxy needs predators, not to destroy, but to stand guard against the things that would destroy everything else. The peace that followed the war was different from the one that had existed before. It was a guarded peace, a protected peace, a peace that acknowledged the existence of dangers in the universe that couldn't be reasoned with or negotiated with. Human and Ravak ships now patrolled the edges of known space, watching for threats that might emerge from the darkness. They had become the galaxy's sword and shield, the predators who hunted the things that hunted civilization itself. Angela often thought about the price of their new role. Humanity had gained acceptance and respect, but they had also become something. They had never wanted to be the galaxy's professional killers. They were the ones who did the violent work that let others sleep peacefully at night. But as she watched a young human soldier teaching a Zephyrian recruit how to use a plasma rifle, Angela realized that maybe this was who they had always been. Meant to be not conquerors or destroyers, but guardians. Not monsters, but protectors. The galaxy had tried to teach humanity that carnivores were evil. Instead, they had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love was being willing to become the monster that stands between civilization and the darkness, and in that darkness, human and Ravak ships continued their eternal patrol, ready to face whatever threats might emerge from the void between stars.